Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Robert Litvak. I direct international security studies at the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting featuring Ambassador Rogelio Pfirter, who's Director General of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Today's meeting is another in the ongoing series that the Woodrow Wilson Center sponsors with the Los Alamos National Laboratory. We're also delighted that Global Green USA could participate in today's meeting as a co-sponsor. For those of you not familiar with the Woodrow Wilson Center, the center is the nation's official memorial to our 28th president, created by an act of Congress. The mission of the center is to do exactly what we're doing today, to provide a forum for leading thinkers, policymakers, to address topical issues and to promote dialogue. So welcome to all of you. Let me now introduce Paul Walker of Global Green USA, who will say a few words about that organization.
Great.
Paul, you can.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, everyone, for coming today. We're really delighted to have Ambassador Pfirter here with us this week. We have hosted Ambassador Rogelio Pfirter from the OPCW 3 years now in Washington, D.C., to talk about the larger issues of chemical weapons non-proliferation, non-proliferation of nuclear and biological weapons to some extent as well, and certainly the role of the OPCW in promoting, in fact, non-proliferation and abolition of weapons of mass destruction. Let me just mention a couple of quick words about Global Green USA, so I don't take away from Ambassador Pfirter's time, though. We have worked as the U.S. affiliate of Green Cross International, as you know, founded by Mikhail Gorbachev about 16 years ago, for well over a decade now, very closely with the OPCW and many other NGOs as well, in trying to promote the safe and sound elimination of weapons of mass destruction, in this particular case, chemical weapons. I first visited and got involved in this whole chemical weapons issue well over 15 years ago, when I was fortunate to partake of a on-site inspection of one of the largest chemical nerve agent sites in the world, a place called Shuchi, in the very western part of Siberia, east of the Ural mountain range in Russia, in July 1994. So that sort of brought me into the whole field, and I've been very focused on it ever since then. So we have worked in Russia. We have outreach offices at every Russian chemical weapons site today, and we've worked very closely with the U.S. administrations, the Russian administrations, and many others as well to come to the point where we are today, where about 28,000 tons destroyed over the last 12 or 15 years. And we've also worked very closely with the OPCW over the years. Their annual Conference of States Party, what's called the CSP, which is in late November, early December each year, to try to promote transparency and NGO, non-governmental organization, and chemical industry participation in the organization as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to you,
okay.
Rob.
Thank you, Paul. Let me just now turn the floor over to Joe Pilot from the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Joe's the co-chair of the series representing Los Alamos. He will introduce our speaker and say a few words to tee up the topic. Before turning the microphone over to Joe, I just wanted to mention that today's meeting is being webcast, so welcome to those watching us on the internet. Also, the text of Ambassador Pfirter's speech will be on our website after today's event, and I just wanted to mention for those who are, if there are any from the press here who would like to have a word with Ambassador Pfirter after today's presentation, please have a word with Michael Lujan, who's sitting in the front row. So, Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rob. Let me offer a welcome from the Los Alamos National Laboratory and from myself. From the Hague Conventions of over a century ago, through the Geneva Protocol, the Atchison-Lilienthal Report and the Baruch Plan, the Atoms for Peace proposal, to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, to the Chemical Weapons Convention, weapons of mass destruction have been seen as a global problem demanding a global solution. The Global Non-Proliferation Treaty approach global treaties and institutions supported by export controls, national laws and regulations, economic and security assurances, sanctions, and regional arrangements of various types, has been important for setting norms concerning weapons of mass destruction. And the treaties have been influential in terms of redefining our thinking about these problems. However, despite their prominence, there's been a decades-long debate over the question of whether the global non-proliferation regimes have been successful. In the last decade especially, there have been growing concerns that these regimes are increasingly showing their age. They are challenged by non-compliance, by the threat of non-state actors, which they never contemplated, and by other issues. International interest in strengthening the various global treaty regimes has grown, but the challenges are significant. Nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons are very different in terms of the threats they pose and in terms of the challenges they present to control. The treaty regimes to control them were created in different times and varied in terms of scope, verification measures, and compliance and enforcement provisions, as well as other features. In the early 1990s, you may recall, in the enthusiasm of the immediate post-Cold War period, there was interest in an attempt to harmonize the regimes to ensure the best features of one was reflected in all. This dream, I think, soon dissolved when closer examination suggested that harmonization was more likely to drive all regimes to the lowest common denominator and perhaps undermine their political support. These concerns were and are very real, but they've probably unduly affected the way we look at the prospect for reforms of the various regimes, and especially at the value of cross-cutting lessons learned. To discuss this important topic, the lessons of the Chemical Weapon Convention for global efforts to reduce or eliminate weapons of mass destruction, we are fortunate to have Ambassador Rogelio Pfirter, the Director General of the OPCW. He is a career diplomat who began his service in the permanent mission of Argentina to the United Nations in New York. As Argentina's Director of Nuclear and Security Affairs and subsequently Undersecretary for Foreign Policy, he was responsible for formulating and developing Argentine policies on non-proliferation, regional and international peace and security, terrorism, and other related crimes. During the 1990s, he participated in negotiating a number of WMD accords, including the Argentine-Brazilian Nuclear Safeguards Agreement and the Tlatelolco Treaty. He helped draft legislation for Argentina's adherence to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the country's regime for the export of sensitive materials. He became the Director General of the OPCW in July 2002, and he was unanimously approved for a renewed appointment for a second mandate from 2006 to 2010. Ambassador Pfirter.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. I'm indeed very pleased and honored to be here today in such a prestigious venue. I wish to thank the Center for its invitation, in particular, of course, to thank the Center's esteemed president and director, Lee Hamilton. I have to say, I'm a great admirer of the Congressman Hamilton's wisdom and knowledge in international affairs and of the bipartisan leadership he demonstrated in this area during his long and distinguished career in the U.S. House of Representatives, as well as chairman of the House Committee on International Affairs. I would also like to express my appreciation to, of course, Robert Litvak, director of the Division of International Security Studies, to my good friend, Dr. Paul Walker, director of Security and Sustainability of Global Green United States. He has been second to none in supporting the cause of the chemical disarmament and non-proliferation, and to Joseph Pilat of Los Alamos National Laboratory for sponsoring my appearance here today. And I have to say, I hope I bring some good news as I tell the story of the Chemical Weapons Convention about how we are operating. I also want to recognize here, acknowledge the impressive achievement of two of Congressman Hamilton's former colleagues, namely Senators Richard Lugar and Sam Nunn, in helping establish the U.S. Cooperative Threat Reduction, or the so-called Nunn-Lugar program. This program has for many years played a major role in helping to secure and destroy not only nuclear stockpiles in Russia, but also chemical weapons and biological pathogens as well. Just weeks ago, I attended with Senator Lugar the opening of an immense new chemical weapons extraction facility in Suche, in Siberia, that was largely built with CTR's support, and I had the opportunity, of course, there to thank him publicly for his great contribution in championing the CTR cause. The opening of the Suche facility attracted considerable media coverage for a chemical weapons event. Indeed, we tend to be rather low-key, because things are working out, therefore people are not too interested. However, I do believe that some articles which appear New York Times, Washington Post, reflect, I believe, a growing public interest in the renewed momentum we are seeing in the sphere of weapons of mass destruction, disarmament, and non-proliferation. A key factor, of course, in this thrust is the very much welcome fact that the United States and Russia are actively engaged in negotiating to further reduce their nuclear stockpiles after the START I treaty expires next December. The ongoing momentum is evident, for example, in the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, which finally, after 10 years of deadlock, is moving forward again on a range of critical issues with a strong backing of the Obama administration. Moreover, a provisional agenda has already been adopted by the preparatory committee of the next year's review conference on the non-proliferation treaty, which is a very positive contrast with times past. President Obama has called for U.S. ratification of the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and with U.S. support, the Conference on Disarmament has agreed to a work plan that includes longer-awaited negotiations on a treaty to ban the production of fissile materials, which would constitute an important step forward in terms of multilateral nuclear disarmament. All of these developments are occurring within the framework of President Obama's bold new commitment to a vision of a nuclear weapons-free world, which he has made the centerpiece of America's defense policy. I wholeheartedly support this vision, which, by the way, Prime Minister Putin appears to echo. For I am of the strong belief that the ultimate elimination of all existing weapons of mass destruction and the parallel vigorous prevention of their proliferation are central to the very survival of humanity. And coincidentally, as has been recalled, I have spent a good deal of my diplomatic career working for the actual promotion of arms control. I did so in my own country in the early 90s. Indeed, I was very much involved in making sure that Argentina nuclear program, which was secret to that moment, became transparent. We signed agreements with Brazil, with the IAEA. I was the first director of the Argentine-Brazilian Agency of Accounting and Control of Nuclear Materials. I was also involved in dismantling Argentina's ballistic missile program called the Condor program, which I thought was totally contrary to the interests of peace and security in the region, certainly in my own country. And finally, in the last 7 years, I've been Director General of the Technical Secretariat of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which brings me to the very subject of my presentation, namely which could be the lessons to be learned from the CWC's implementation when considering the challenges of going to zero with weapons of mass destruction. And of course, let me first of all introduce an important caveat. I'm fully aware, of course, of the different and unique complexities involved in each category of WMDs. And I will be the last one to suggest that one can automatically implement whatever is happening in the chemical field into other fields, namely nuclear and biological. To fully grasp the profound political and military implications of abolishing nuclear weapons, one writer has suggested imagining the great powers in the 19th century trying to get rid of abolish gunpowder. It is extremely complex and difficult, and therefore I don't intend to present the CWC as a perfect or fully replicable model for abolishing all weapons of mass destruction. However, at the same time, I do believe that the experience of implementing the Chemical Weapons Convention offers some important lessons and insights for one day going to zero on all categories of weapons of mass destruction. I would begin by highlighting the fact, and if I'm allowed a bit of history here, that the Convention is the first and only treaty ever designed to eliminate an entire category of weapons of mass destruction, and that it took nearly a century to come to such a stage. The efforts began in The Hague with the Hague Convention of 1999, which prohibited the use of asphyxiating and deleterious gases, but fell apart in the World War I when chlorine, phosgene, and mustard gas were all deployed in a massive scale. A second attempt at the ban was made by the Geneva Protocol in 1925, which prohibited the use of both chemical and biological weapons, but it did not prohibit, and that was their failure, the development, production, and stockpiling. As a result, new and more deadly chemical weapons continued to be developed in the ensuing decades. They were not used in the Second World War, but they were stockpiled in large quantities by the superpowers during the Cold War. And as we all know, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons on a large scale to kill and maim tens of thousands of Iranians and Iraqi Kurds during the 1980s. With the end of the Cold War, and on the heels of the Iraq-Iran conflict, the United States and the then Soviet Union finally came together towards the end of the 80s to lead multilateral negotiations on a new treaty that would do away with these terrible weapons altogether. And it is indeed very much the result of US-Russia cooperation and of US-Russian drive that the Chemical Weapons Convention was finally concluded and was open for signature in 1993 in Paris and entered into force in 1997. Now let me just try to divide the rest of my presentation into 4 segments. First, I will try to explain what the Chemical Weapons Convention is all about. Secondly, what are its achievements. Thirdly, what are the challenges we face ahead. And fourthly, what would be the lessons learned which could be of relevance to other categories of weapons of mass destruction. Firstly, what is that the Chemical Weapons Convention is all about? Well, unlike its predecessors, which I just recalled, the Convention is a comprehensive ban that prohibits the development, production, stockpiling, or use of chemical weapons. And in that sense, is unique as a treaty of the kind when one compares with other treaties. Unlike the NPT, all state parties to the Convention have equal rights and obligations, and all those who possess chemical weapons must destroy the stockpiles according to legally binding procedures and deadlines. And in contrast to the Biological Weapons Convention, which has no verification regime, the Chemical Weapons Convention created a multilateral organization, the one which I am honored to lead, the OPCW, Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, through which all state parties are subject to a non-discriminatory but rather stringent and intensive regime of multilateral inspections aimed at verifying compliance with its provisions, at ensuring the total destruction of existing stockpiles, as well as to ensuring the future non-proliferation of chemical weapons. The destruction of all existing chemical weapons is one core, and I would say urgent, objective of the Convention. And the treaty establishes strict deadlines for its implementation, April 2012 being the latest for the countries that were parties to the Convention at the time of entering into force in 1997. Thus, within 30 days of joining, every state party that possesses chemical weapons must provide a detailed and complete declaration of stockpiles to us, to the OPCW. We immediately verify, and then we negotiate with the country concerned a facility agreement and a destruction plan, which is under the supervision of the OPCW and which the countries which possess the chemical weapons are supposed to implement as per the Convention. The same is done with chemical weapons production facilities, which must either be completely destroyed or, after approval of the OPCW, converted to purposes not prohibited under the Convention. So the destruction of existing stockpiles, the disarmament in the field of chemical weapons, is one core objective of this Convention. And it is a short-term objective in the sense that it has a deadline. A second, a long-term objective of the Chemical Weapons Convention, which is the one that will ensure its existence throughout time, is ensuring the future non-proliferation of chemical weapons. And in order to verify compliance with this central objective, the CWC establishes a stringent verification regime of round-year inspections over plants producing toxic chemicals and precursors that could potentially be used in chemical weapons, and that state parties are obliged to declare in accordance with 3 convention schedules which are attached to the Convention. In addition to these three categories of chemicals, production plants or laboratories, the Convention also establishes the obligation to inspect other chemical production facilities that don't produce shadow chemicals, but whose production processes could lend themselves to making chemical weapons. And they are also declarable and therefore inspectable. Together with these two major goals of disarmament and non-proliferation, the Convention attaches quite cleverly and balanced fashion two other sustaining objectives, which are assistance and protection in the case for all member states in the case they are victimized with the use or the threat of use of chemical weapons, as well as international cooperation for the peaceful use, for the promotion of the peaceful uses of chemistry. These are all into the Convention, and they are quite important for a large number of countries, not the least for developing countries, which see in the Convention a means for advancing their access to chemical industry. However, I have to say that the OPCW, although it has in its, as a result of the Convention, a strong chapter of international cooperation, is not a development agency. And therefore, anything that has to do with international cooperation is bound to be scrutinized under the very objectives of the Convention, which is to ensure that no more chemical weapons will ever be produced. These are then the four main components of the treaty, in short, which is disarmament, non-proliferation, assistance and protection, and international cooperation. They are bundled in a balanced fashion, and as I said, they have been very instrumental in ensuring that the Convention gained popularity, grew in size, and so much so that today encompasses 98% of the world's population and chemical industry. We have 188 member states, and that is to say this is the fastest growing treaty in this category of weapons of mass destruction ever in the history of in modern history. Now, this is the result not just of the Convention being cleverly crafted, but it's also, I think, the result of the achievements which the Convention shows on all fronts. Membership helps to achieve the results help to achieve greater membership. What are the results so far? Well, first of all, I said one of the main goals is, of course, to ensure the total irreversible destruction of all existing chemical weapons. How have we done on that front? I think we have done not as ideally we should have done, but we have done well. And so well that we can say that 43% of all existing and declared chemical weapons by all what we call possessor states, those who declare they have the chemical weapons, 43% have already been irreversibly destroyed under the verification of the Chemical Weapons Conventions Organization, the OPCW. Now, that is an impressive figure when you estimate that, and you recall that 70,000 tons of chemical weapons were declared by possessor states at the time when they joined the Convention, and that some of those agents, in very small quantities, can kill a lot of people around. So, in itself is a very impressive achievement, and it is a quantitative reduction in the dangers for peace and security. Moreover, 3 of the possessor states, we have 6 of those, Albania, India, and a state that prefers not to be identified, and therefore I cannot mention as Director General, have already completed destruction of their entire stockpiles. So they have fulfilled their obligations within the deadlines of the Convention. In addition, all of the associated facilities that produce chemical weapons were deactivated early on, and all but a handful have since been either destroyed or converted to peaceful uses. Russia is the largest possessor state. It declared close to almost 40,000 tons of deadly chemicals when it joined the Convention. And Russia, I have to say, has significantly accelerated its destruction program and eliminated nearly a third of its stockpile. Russia started destroying chemical weapons only in 2003, let's say a few years after entering into force of the treaty. And given the enormous size of stockpile, it quite clearly represents for it an enormous challenge to complete destruction by 2012. The process of destruction in Russia will certainly accelerate with the recent opening of the extraction facility in Suche, which, as I said before, has recently been commissioned and was built a lot with American financial support, mostly. And Russia is also intent on commissioning 2 more facilities shortly, hopefully, which are one in Kisner and another called Pochev. Russia has reaffirmed repeatedly and officially its intention to meet the 2012 treaty deadline. The second largest stockpile was declared by the United States, which declared about 28,600 metric tons. The United States, I have to say, was the first country to start disposing of its chemical weapons stockpile, even before the entry into force of the treaty, and has already destroyed, under OPCW verifications, more than 60% of stockpile, including almost all of the most dangerous ones. Almost all of the dangerous. In early June, only 2 weeks ago, with Bob Mikulak, who is over there sitting, I joined a group of diplomats representing what we call the Executive Council of our organization, one of the policy-making organs, on a visit to 2 of the facilities which the United States has for these, as part of its program for destroying chemical weapons. One is in operation, one is under construction. The one under construction is in Pueblo, in Colorado, and the one in operation is in Umatilla, Oregon. The visit took place at the invitation of the United States and provided ample evidence, in my view, of the firm and resolute commitment of the United States to eliminating completely and irreversibly its chemical stockpile as established in the Convention in a safe and effective manner. I have to say that much as I'm aware that as per today's estimates, the United States appears not to be able to destroy more than 90% of stockpile by April 2012, I look forward to the unremitting continued efforts to meet the treaty legal deadline, taking advantage of any opportunities to further accelerate the CW destruction program. In addition, I readily recognize the substantial financial and technical resources allocated by the United States to the implementation of the CWC, as well as the exemplary safety record of the program in place. In fact, Article 4, Paragraph 10 of the Convention mandates that in destroying their chemical weapons, possessor states shall assign the highest priority to human safety and the protection of the environment. And indeed, safely disposing of chemical weapons is a challenging and staggering endeavor. The global stockpiles include large quantities of VX, a small vial of which probably dispersed can kill a lot of people. And some of these agents were stored in bulk containers, but the majority were containing nearly 9 million rockets, artillery shells, landmines, and other ordnance. So all of these weapons must be individually destroyed, and that is costly, hazardous, and time-consuming. As chemical weapons cannot be transported, facilities must be constructed on site at every storage depot to destroy them. And indeed, what we have seen, wherever there's been chemical weapons in anywhere in the world, on the site, a specialized, dedicated facility is being built at the cost of millions or thousands of millions. And those facilities, by and large, they need to be destroyed after that, because anything that has been in contact with the chemicals cannot survive and should not survive under the Convention. It needs to be verifiably destroyed. Some of the ancillary buildings, of course, can be reconverted, but basically the thrust of it, the reactors and other things, need to be destroyed. Moreover, the destruction and disposal arises understandable concerns at state and local community levels. That is to say that whilst one technology, which quickly implemented here in the United States, seemed to be accepted in the beginning, for instance, incineration, no longer is, and no alternative technology need to be instrumented, and that also takes time and creates further demands on the program. All this has had a substantial logical impact not just on the pace of destruction, but also on the costs involved. Today, the global destruction effort has cost tens of billions of dollars, and billions more will be needed to finish the work. But I'm proud to say, again, that all our possessor states have fully implemented this Article 4, Paragraph 10, which I mentioned before, and the record demonstrates a determination not only to comply with the obligations under the Convention, but to do so in the most consensuous possible way. So on the disarmament front, I think we are doing fairly well. However, as I said, not ideally well, because ideally we should destroy all the stockpiles by 29th April 2012. And the remaining time, 3 years, is not necessarily one that entices or encourages optimism about that. As regards the non-proliferation provisions of the Convention, I have to say that much to the surprise of some who were a bit worried that we will not be able to instrument a credible, effective verification regime for chemical industry for these purposes, the OPCW has succeeded in establishing such regime. And already more than 1,500 inspections have taken place in about 80 countries around the world. And this has been done under a very stringent, again, industry verification regime. And I mentioned industry. I would like to highlight a unique feature of the Chemical Weapons Convention, and it is the first arms control treaty that relies upon industry, that is to say, on those who are in the line of production of the very items or goods or hardware that has to do with the fabrication and deployment of chemical weapons. It relies on, it is the first treaty really to involve them into not just its implementation, but also in the shaping of the process of implementation. Indeed, industry, I have to say, was invited to participate in the final stages of the negotiations leading to the conclusion of the treaty, and today is recognized as a major stakeholder. From the outset, it has worked out very closely with us to design a credible verification system and to help train our inspectors. The industry also implements its own governance measures to ensure that its products and technologies are not diverted for hostile purposes. I pay tribute in particular to American Chemistry Council, which has been so very helpful all along. So on that front of non-proliferation, I think we have also delivered considerably beyond, I would say, even what the expectations were in the beginning. And finally, as regards the other two areas, assistance and protection and international cooperation for the promotion of peaceful uses of chemistry, I think there too we have also been able to provide our state parties with the type of programs and capacity building that they require, particularly in the light of their concerns about the possibility of chemicals being used not so much by states, but by terrorists. And indeed, we have seen a few cases of those already happening. And I have to say that although the OPCW is not an anti-terrorist organization, and our treaty was negotiated in the Cold War, it doesn't mention the word terrorism at all. However, there is an expectation in the international community that given the area in which we operate and the type of skills we develop, we will make a contribution to the global efforts against terrorism. And we are, of course, mentioned in Resolution 1540, and I myself will be the day after tomorrow in the United Nations addressing this issue. One of the Security Council committees, the one created under the UN Security Council Resolution 1373. And on that front, too, I think we have been able, as I said, as an organization to deliver. But having said that, and having somehow summarized what achievements could be, I come now into the chapter of challenges. The challenges are important, and some of them are certainly unique in the sphere of weapons of mass destruction. One I have already mentioned. 2012 is there, and we need our countries to ensure that they, the possessor states, complete destruction by that date. This will not be easy. In the case of the Russian Federation and the United States, given the large amounts of chemicals still to be destroyed and a very limited time available under the treaty, this is really a tall order for both of them. And this is an issue, however, I have to say, that will focus more and more attention in my organization, political attention in the coming future, and therefore that will require, particularly on the part of the United States, I think Russia also, appropriate alertness and careful diplomatic management as we move on towards that date. We hope that the third remaining country, I haven't mentioned yet, which has still a stockpile to destroy, is Libya, will do so promptly. And indeed, the stockpile is rather small. They should be able to complete it before 2012. There is another case, which is the case of Iraq, which just joined the convention, and which has declared a stockpile. That because of the very characteristics, that is to say the location, the conditions under which these weapons are, is going to represent a challenging task both for Iraq in terms that it has to assume the responsibility for destruction, and for ourselves as we carry on our own responsibility of verification. But we are working on Iraq on that front, and we will hopefully, after having completed negotiations with Iraq, be able to propose to the membership of the organization a specific destruction plan for the completing the elimination of the weapons which are there still. In the field of destruction of chemical weapons, another challenge I should mention is also with a different category of weapons. These are the weapons that were made before the end of the Second World War and which have been abandoned in territories of other countries. There are lots of those weapons which were abandoned by the Japanese Imperial Army in the territory of China, and they are also to be destroyed under the convention. And we are supporting that effort and look forward to the commencement of destruction. So far, quite a few of them, of these weapons, have been actually identified and stored, but we need now to start the destruction of them. In the front of non-proliferation, I have to say the challenges are quite important. They might not be as urgent and pressing as they are on the field of destruction, given deadlines, but they are very, very important because they go to the very core of the long-term objectives of the organization. First of all, I think that we need to ensure is the unrelenting maintenance of a high degree of political commitment of all state parties to the full implementation of the treaty. This will ensure that the verification regime continues to be implemented in full and that adequately embraces all statutory industrial categories. And I mention this issue because there is no necessarily total agreement as to the intensity of our efforts in some categories of industries, which we, from the point of view of the Secretariat, and we other countries believe would be very important for non-proliferation purposes, but which some other countries do not necessarily agree on. So I think that for the non-proliferation goals of the Convention to be really attained, we need all countries to come together, join forces, and allow the organization to do its job comprehensively, and, as I said, in the number and intensity of inspections that are required. This is particularly important in the light of the possible attempt by terrorists to either make use of chemicals or to make chemical industry a victim of its own designs. As established in Security Council resolutions, terrorists must not be allowed to get access to these components. And therefore, all state parties need to make sure that they implement the Convention to the full in order to prevent them from having that access. Implementing the Convention to the full is a big challenge for non-proliferation purposes. Implementing the Convention is much more than just signing it and saying that one politically agrees with it. Implementing the Convention means that the countries concerned need to adopt all the necessary legislative, administrative measures required in order to ensure that the prohibitions of the Convention are effective within their territories and the appropriate sanctions are implemented for those who violate them. So far, 50% of our membership of 188 countries do have that legislation in place, but 50% do not. And therefore, that's a pending subject and a challenge for the future. We are supporting them. I have to say another enormous, important characteristic of our treaty, which I believe goes to one of the reasons why it is successful, is that we actively support countries in their implementing legislation. My organization acts almost as a clearinghouse for draft legislation in many countries, and they bring it to us, and that way we ensure not only that the legislation covers everything it needs to cover, but also that some sort of standardized and level playing field for all countries concerned in terms of legislation. And I have to say that that is not just seen as very useful, necessary by developing countries, but also by European countries and others. And we are happy to see that that effort is recognized as one of the keys to ensuring, as I said, the successful implementation of the Convention. One remaining major challenge for the organization is certainly achieving full universality. Much as we have made forward substantially. And as I said, we have 188 member states, and this is wonderful. However, we still that close and that far from really achieving full universality. We're still 7 states short of UN membership. Angola, Egypt, Israel, Myanmar, North Korea, Syria, and Somalia are still not members. Now, we hope that, for instance, Angola will join fairly soon. We know about the difficulties of Somalia, not just to implement the Chemical Weapons Convention, but other measures. Our concern is basically around the Middle East and in what pertains to North Korea. In the case of the Middle East, unfortunately, Egypt, Israel, and Syria are still not members. They have exposed a series of arguments which have to do with the desire, in the case of Egypt and Syria, of having a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, weapons mass extraction-free zone in the Middle East. And in the case of Israel, of looking for the definitive solution of the Middle East crisis. I don't think anyone disagrees with these very two objectives. We all would like to see the Middle East absolutely free of weapons of mass destruction, and certainly we all look forward in earnest to the day when there will be peace in the Middle East. However, I have to say that the practical effect of these two arguments is postponing indefinitely the bringing the benefits of the Chemical Weapons Convention to the peoples of the Middle East. Today, chemical weapons have, as we all recognize, and that's why they are being destroyed, very relative strategic and tactical significance. In the battlefield, they are sort of two-edged weapons, and that's why they are being eliminated. They remain basically as weapons capable of terrorizing and killing and maiming civilians. So what we say in the Middle East, let there be a weapons of mass destruction-free zone, but why wait? We know the nuclear issue is so very complex. Why not take advantage of the Chemical Weapons Convention, which is there, and which really would bring a better, so to say, legal framework for the peoples of the Middle East. And as far as the solution of the conflict, what we say is maybe joining the convention will in itself not solve the problem, but certainly create better conditions for eventually solving the problem. And I do hope that packages are being structured and worked out for trying to solve the issue of the Middle East, this very top priority of the international community, that the possibility of accession to the Chemical Weapons Convention will be looked as one of the condiments for that package. In the case of North Korea, I have to say, we have so far been dismayed by the absence of any will on their part to even have contacts with us. Because, for instance, with the case of Egypt and Israel, we do have very intensive contacts and very good cooperation, and I have to recognize and pay tribute to those governments for the goodwill they show towards the organization. But in the case of North Korea, unfortunately, we haven't got any positive responses. In the case of North Korea, there have been also allegations about the existence of chemical weapon stockpiles. On top of that, North Korea, of course, under Security Council Resolution 1718, which was ratified only days ago in the wake of the second nuclear explosion, mandates that at Article 7 of the Charter, North Korea should also come clear, not just on the nuclear, but on other categories of weapons of mass destruction. That includes, of course, the chemical. So there's a double element there which should encourage them to join. And I think that that would be a strong contribution also of peace in that part of the world. Of course, the six-party talks have other priorities, but we look forward someday when this issue can also be part of the package. In the meantime, on our side, we try to establish contacts with North Korea, and we remain available to them if they wish to join. Now, that's so much for the challenge. Let me just now come to the end, which is the lessons learned and how this could eventually benefit other categories of weapons of mass destruction. The first lesson that we have learned from this Chemical Weapons Convention, as we consider its achievements, is that the principle of non-discrimination between possessor and non-possessor states is one of the elements widely recognized as encouraging all countries to join and to be actively and happily participating in the treaty. The principle has engendered a broad sense of ownership among all PCW members and a shared commitment of achieving the Convention's goal. And it's of fundamental importance in multilateral disarmament efforts. The second element is the comprehensive nature of the treaty. As the history of the Hague Convention and Geneva Protocols regrettably demonstrated, So long as chemical weapons were allowed to exist, to be produced, even if not used, they would be made. The Chemical Weapons Convention aims to eliminate that threat by comprehensively banning these weapons of mass destruction and preventing new ones from emerging. This remains a work in progress, and the final outcome is by no means assured. But the possession and use of chemical weapons has been delegitimized and overwhelmingly condemned by majority of states through their membership in the OPCW. A third element, which I think is important as we look forward, as we try to take stock of where we are now, is the collaboration and the relation we have with industry. By doing so, industry, I have to say, is the object of our intrusive mechanism. We inspect industry, but at the same time, as I also mentioned, we recognize them as partners. I think that bringing on board those, as I said, who are in the line of production, one way or the other, of the very agents you want to either destroy or prohibit, is crucial for the success of any non-proliferation endeavor. You need to bring everyone in and to convince them that by joining, they are also attending to their very own interest. And I think chemical industry did come to that conclusion, and this is one of the key elements why this treaty is so very vital on its non-proliferation front. Industry, I would say, happily and readily is supporting us, although they pay a cost whenever we inspect them, and that's not a cost they necessarily like. A fourth element, I think, in the OPCW's, let's say, I won't call it success story, but so far so good, is the ethos of mutual assistance, which I think is also very, very important. And the ethos of mutual assistance, in my view, in my humble experience, has to do much more with just the sort of ambulance service you might run in order to support someone. Actually, we do not run an ambulance service. We just provide coordination and support for the assistance required. But it has to do with convincing everyone that by joining, their interests are better attended to and that they are protected. Non-proliferation is seen by many countries as an agenda of the powerful at the expense of the poor and weak. I believe it's exactly the contrary. I believe that the poor and weak are the first ones who should be interested in non-proliferation, because it's for them that the provision of legal regimes, verification regimes and others can give them the assurance that they cannot provide for themselves. And the mutual assistance ethos has a lot to do with that. And I think another thing which I think is very important in the context of the convention is that we have been able to convey the message that the mutual assistance we provide each other, the mutual partnership we implement through our non-proliferation efforts is to the benefit of everyone. It's not just the agenda of the few, it is the agenda of the whole. This, of course, has required a lot of talking our way through with this argument. But I have to say this is a very argument I myself implemented when I sort of helped my country to become transparent in areas where it wasn't in the past, and see that by joining the international community, by being part and a parcel of recognizing that we need to work all together, its interest was better defended and promoted than by being secretive and by developing weapons which would ultimately weaken rather than strengthen national interest. I should also mention, I believe, our tradition of consensus-based policy making, which requires the competing interests of all member states to be reconciled to reach agreement on a policy issue. And indeed, we do have a very strong consensus culture, and everyone is prepared to walk whatever extra miles are required in order to get there. And I think this is very important. And when I say everyone, I'm not just talking in abstract. I'm talking about Iran, I'm talking about the United States, I'm talking about all the countries which, when they sit down, they need to pass a decision, are prepared to explore whatever possibilities exist for reaching a decision by consensus, and they believe that once you are part of the consensus, the binding of that decision is very, very strong. And if you cheat after that, then your fault is so much stronger, or so much worse, I have to say, stronger. So that, I think, is very, very important. That also, as a result of that, I believe that the OPCW also represents a vindication for multilateralism as a viable way for effectively addressing questions related to weapons of mass destruction, and also for enhancing international peace and security. Now, I will finalize by suggesting that nothing prevents us from walking, I would say, mutatis mutandis, of course, a similar path in the other two categories, the nuclear and biological weapons. I have to say that thanks to the leadership shown by the American administration with the support of other countries, we now see that this is not impossible. Whilst the process will not be an easy one, there are things that we can do today to pave the way for a world free of weapons of mass destruction. And one such step, of course I'm interested party here, is the continuous strengthening of international organizations with competence in the field. While these organizations will never substitute national decisions in the light of national interest, as well as the vision of world leaders, by providing all countries with a level playing field, they do stand unequal chances of promoting the effective and strict implementation of international non-proliferation norms and of legitimately disqualifying under the law those governments that fail to comply or that cheat. And some have indeed cheated in the field of weapons of mass destruction. And hence the lack of trust in the part of the international community in their programs. That is why it is so very important to ensure that the international organizations concerned, be it the OPCW, the IEA, the CTBTO, remain strong, well managed, and receive all necessary political and financial support on the part of all countries, but very much in particular by those countries that under the United Nations Charter have a special responsibility in the maintenance of world peace and security. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have limited time. We have time maybe for 2 or 3 questions. There are microphones on the side. Who would like to begin? Gentleman in the middle there, microphone. You can take the microphone off the stand. Thank you. Speaker, please identify yourselves and just be brief since time is short.
David Smith, could you elaborate on the remaining chemical weapons in Iraq?
Was that microphone on? I don't think so.
I did hear.
Okay.
It's about if I could elaborate on remaining chemical weapons in Iraq.
Yes, the remaining chemical weapons in Iraq. Yeah.
Right. Well, about those, I have to say that Iraq just joined the convention. There were some weapons which, from the old programs, that were stored in a certain bunker outside Baghdad, and Iraq has declared them as they joined the convention early this year. But we still are to ascertain exactly how many and what conditions they are into. Under the convention, we are supposed to take an early inspection, initial inspection, to verify the quantities declared. And we are in the process of talking with Iraqis in order to see how we can implement that. We are ready to carry on that initial inspection, as we call it. And Iraq has shown extraordinary goodwill into this field. I have to say we have very good cooperation, but the security conditions under which these bunkers were filled and prevailing some of these storage facilities near Fallujah and so on, all these things require careful treatment, and that's where we are engaged into. I have to say that for the OPCW, the entry of Iraq has been a very momentous occasion because, of course, not just because of the symbolism of Iraq joining, but also because I think that for us it represents a challenge of making sure that we do bring Iraq into the family of the OPCW, not just as a full member, but as a happy member, and that's what we are trying to do now.
Any other questions? Yes. Take a woman in the back there.
Cheryl Voss, Federation of American Scientists. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations on big steps towards universality achievement in the last year and a half. And on that note, as 2012 approaches, you said it appears that the U.S. will probably not be meeting its destruction goals. How do you take this to the convention, to the members, such as Iran, who would see that as non-compliance, to highlight the strong U.S. efforts, their assistance for other countries' destruction, to maintain the integrity of the convention such that you can still have further effort, you said effort or achievement leads to membership, to continue your goals of universality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I have to say that I take the information provided by the United States concerning the status of the destruction program as information of today. We still have to see. The United States in 2006 estimated would only be able to destroy 66% more or less of the stockpile. Now it's talking about 90%. So estimates change. I'm very aware of the lack of elasticity of parts of the program. I'm very aware of that, and that's why I believe we need to manage that. I mean, the United States needs to ensure that proper diplomatic understanding emerges of this situation. In terms of compliance or not compliance, I think we have to wait until 30th April 2012. I don't think that the issue arises before that. It should not arise before that. What is important here is to be aware of the fact that destroying chemical weapons is a very complex task in itself, and I think that message is understood by a lot of people. When we come to 2012, I think what people will do is look at how countries have performed, how committed they have been, and then they will look into the situation. We already had one country, Albania, which was not able to meet the actual deadline, and resorting to one article in the Convention, Article 12, the policy-making organs, as we call them, the Executive Council more concretely, did take some remedial action, but it wasn't punishing Albania, but rather encouraging them to complete it as soon as possible. And that's exactly, I think, the type of approach we need to take in the light of what countries do. Let's wait for 2012, see where we are, and let countries then decide exactly what the measures are. Of course, from my point of view as Director General, the date of 2012 is a solemn date. It's legally binding date. And I think that's the way a lot of people see it. At the same time, I also am very aware that the very goal of this convention is destruction of chemical weapons, the dates being instrumental. And so we have to ensure that all possessor states remain steadfastly committed to destroying their stockpiles. That, I think, ultimately is a very, very important element.
Thank you. Yes. And gentleman there, last question. Yes.
Thanks. John Caves, National Defense University. Ambassador, thank you for an excellent presentation. One question regarding last April's second review conference. The Scientific Advisory Board had prepared a report in advance of that RevCon, and it talked about the proliferation potential and the verification challenges associated not just with the globalization of the chemical industry, but also technological developments, micro devices, and things of that regard. But I was struck by how little attention that was given in the report coming out of the second review conference. Any insights into what that says about how the states parties are looking at this issue and its importance for the OPCW?
Well, I think the Scientific Advisory Board is a very important board. I certainly, it advises me, and I forward that advice to member states. I found crucial to the success of this organization also that whatever we decide politically should be well informed scientifically, and therefore I appreciate enormously their efforts. There are different approaches as to what we do with the results of the work of the Scientific Advisory Board, the SAP, we call it for short. I think that that's why you found what you found in the report of the second review conference. However, I think that I certainly intend to continue presenting the case of SAP. I will certainly continue to support it very, very strongly, and I believe that member states themselves will want in due course to take stock regularly of the reports of the SAP. What we have to avoid is to politicize science. I think that the good thing about the SAP is that it can provide, the Scientific Advisory Board, it can provide us objective scientific advice, and that should not be tinkered with by political, so to say, considerations. So we need to strike the right balance, and I think the right balance is by, at this stage, is Director General providing full support to the Scientific Advisory Board, allowing the Secretariat to benefit from its advice on all fronts. You mentioned some, how microreactors might impact on our work, how nanotechnology will impact, the closing gap between biology and chemistry on some fronts, the emergence of new chemicals. All these things we need to be very alert. Scientific Advisory Board will flag these issues. We need to have them concentrated, and that's what we'll do. And then member states need to take stock of this and respect the scientific entity of what is being presented, and hopefully take decisions well-informed decisions in issues which are required from them.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. We've been treated to a rich presentation. Please join me in thanking Ambassador Pfirter for an excellent presentation.